the orbits of asteroids. It's warping their orbit, and that's where Earth is running into these asteroids that would normally miss us. And now they're entering our atmosphere at much greater frequency.
Well, we have had quite a few small meteorites, and we've had some pretty decent meteor showers, the Leonids and the Perseids. But if you go to the near-Earth objects, it's called the NEO, or particularly hazardous asteroids, PHAs, the table has a whole bunch of 2016 dated stuff in there. Normally we see 2012, 2013, 2014. It's pretty well populated. But we're seeing a lot of stuff that just showed up in 2016. Do you think that the number of asteroids pulled out of the asteroid belt and into collision course with Earth's elliptical path, do you think that's going to increase?
Yeah, it's not necessarily coming out of our asteroid belt, but ones that the orbits would normally miss us. Now the orbits are warped, and it happens to be crossing our path, because a planet tends to clear asteroids out of its normal path. They'll either run, if you have thousands of years of if you have 1,000 years of passing, well, normally the path is clear. That's one of the definitions of a planet, when its orbital path is clear of other planets or moons. You know how Pluto crosses Neptune's orbit, so it was canceled out as being a planet for that particular reason. Well, that's another reason in itself why it's there. I think it's our planet that bumped it. It used to be the moon. It used to be a moon of Neptune.
And, just like Mercury used to be a moon of Venus. And by the way, I for my money, Pluto is a planet. I just loved the photography that came back from Pluto. Absolutely spectacular planet.
Yeah, it's I'm have my eye on what. I'm very curious on what this planet will be looking like whenever they allow us to see it.
Well, it's funny that you add that when they allow us to see it. I mentioned earlier in the program that there's probably some 10,000 what I would consider adequate amateur telescopes. Most of these are Schmidt-Cassegrains that can, they have motor drives on them. They can be locked into position night after night. They can take digital photographs and layer them one on top of the other on top of the other. But this is serious astronomy for an amateur, to set a telescope up to run the same program over and over again for, say, 90 days or 6 months. This is what it takes to actually see something move in space. It takes a tremendous amount of patience. And to be honest, all the people that I've talked to, they don't even know where to look. And these telescopes can only see about 2 or 3 degrees of space, which means if you're going to look at, say, a 120-degree swath, you're talking about 40 telescopes just to look at one plane of that cone. It's a cone, not a triangle. So you got to look all over that cone. It could take 2,000 telescopes to look in that direction, and one of them might catch that planet.
Right. There's roughly 2 to 3 million amateur astronomers, but they're not all active at once. But that's how many there's amateur astronomers throughout the world. Some of these people have comparable equipment as the professionals.
Oh yeah, I mean a 10 or 12-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain with a motor drive. You're talking about a $6,000 to $8,000 telescope. Not very many amateurs out there have that. There's probably less than 20,000 of them active in the world right now. And having the Asian astronomers, the data that they've witnessed this object in 1054, that's only about 960 years ago. 13 months, they saw it coming in, 13 months leaving without a telescope, naked eye observation. That had to be a large object to reflect light, which the eye can only catch at about 6.5 magnitude as far as brightness. It had to be a quite large object. We can, if it's a planet, we can, and like the space shuttle, we can see down to about -1.5 if you know right where to look when it's coming. But if it's -3.5, that baby's bright. So I tend to disagree a little bit, unless it's really, really far away and really, really small. Then you're looking at -6.5, -8.5, and that's going to have to be reflecting a lot of light off the sun. It's going to have to be a very bright planet or have an atmosphere that has clouds in it or something that will reflect the sunlight.
Keep in mind, the greater the number, the smaller the magnitude of light is, because the scale is almost opposite of what you normally expect.
Yeah, but it's minus. You actually have to go minus, below 0, before you can really start seeing it with the naked eye. So, yeah, a 6.5 plus, you're not going to see it. A -6.5 is going to be fairly bright in the heavens.
Right, but that's what we estimate that this was a -6.5. I'm sorry that I missed.
Well, that's rocking. I mean, that'll bring everybody into the street.
Yeah, and they had misobserved this for 26 months.
And when was this? When was that observation?
And 1054.
Oh, well, so you don't have a lot of light pollution.
Correct.
1054.
Yes. People went to bed early. They didn't have, after the fires were out, they went to bed unless it was wintertime. And this was we have it very well documented because it was the Chinese, the Koreans, and the Japanese. All three of these were, if you want to call them state-sponsored astronomers, by the kingdom, by the emperors of that time period in those different regions. And they all documented this thing. And the supernova was seen like maybe 2-3 months earlier.
Sure.
And this was seen in multiple constellations as it was making its way around the sun and all the way back out. Supernovas are stationary. They can't travel through multiple constellations.
That's true. And Plato even recorded it.
So if we use that data, we can narrow our field of view on where to look, if you want to tell your audience on where to look.
No, so look toward the summer triangle. Don't you don't have to look all over space. Just look toward that direction, and
it would be to the left of Sagittarius if it was coming back in March, and if it's coming back in April, it'd be to the left of Capricorn.
Okay.
On the ecliptic only. Because the data in the biblical and also the data that matches the Chinese, this object crossed the Earth's path twice. Well, you have one other point, which is the sun. The center of the sun is a fixed point that it orbits. So you got 3 fixed points. For it to cross Earth's path twice, as stated in CO6 and CO7, as it describes 2 meteor showers.
Yeah, it's reasonable to assume that the planet's not by itself.
Well, it may have some moons, but it was not documented by any of the biblical writings or the Chinese, so I don't state anything. But it may have one, but I just can't state it because I don't have any data to back that up.
But it could be dragging, smaller trash through space.
Oh, without a doubt. Meteor showers have been documented left and right. This could give us meteor showers many years after it's even passed. Like the Leonid meteor showers from a past comet.
That's right. The comet's head is long since exploded and gone, but the tail, we keep passing through it every year.
Correct. And the tail is not stationary. It's moving debris. Once it's in motion, it continues to come in through. Mm-hmm. And this thing is going to be dragging a lot of debris because it passes through debris fields. And it's going to be attracted by its magnetic pull, and then they're going to trail behind it. And this once it's in motion, it doesn't need the planet to keep it in motion.
Mm-hmm.
And so
let's take a quick break. We'll be right back at the top of the hour of more Gil Broussard. Don't go away. More X Squared Radio coming at you. He was on the program a year ago, April 15th, 2015. I highly encourage you to go back and listen to that archive because we laid down a very, very good foundation for what Planet X, we call it Planet 7X because it's actually 7 times the mass or diameter of Earth. And in the first segment tonight, Gil was very good about explaining the difference between magnetic attraction and gravitational attraction. But as this planet gets closer to Earth, it's going to start having exponentially greater effects. And my question, Gil, is if this gravitational body approaches Earth closely the way you predict, what will the oceans do?
You're one of the first ones to ask that question that way. Only about 3 or 4 times in the past have they ever passed close to Earth. Usually, Earth is, it's many millions of miles away at the time, and so you only have the drought or the Earth's earthquakes or something else. But when it comes close, there's a strange piece of phenomena that's similar to a comet's tail. And according to the biblical data that is given us, that we're going to go through a period where Earth will enter into this comet or plasma stream, and that will reduce our rotational spin by 4.5 to 5.5% compounded hourly, where we come to a complete stop. Well, if Earth comes to a complete stop, as you well know, that there's a bulge of water about 12 kilometers at the equator.
Yeah, the equatorial bulge, because of the centripetal force of Earth revolving on its axis. The
Right.
ocean is, naturally affected to a deeper formation than it would normally be if the water was just allowed to settle to its lowest point.
So you'd have more earthquakes as the landmass wants to become more round instead of egg, or what would you call that, where it's out in the center?
Well, it becomes more elliptoid, but
Right.
the thing is that the Earth is affected with these, what we call tidal gravity forces, not just from the sun as we revolve, but also from our moon. Our moon goes around the Earth once every 28 days, very, very slow orbit, and it's not very massive. But its effect on the crust is this stretching and squeezing activity that creates our tides, but it also has an effect on the crust. The core, however, is much more massive and has a lot more inertia. So the core might be what brings the crust back to its right angle, correct angle, after this planet passes by.
Yeah, see, this is part of the thing that I think maybe our books may have to be edited a little bit. Because the moon it has gravity, but it has no magnetic field. And
that's correct.
Even if we give the moon a similar ratio of 1.5 times its radius for the Roche limit, well, that Roche limit doesn't reach the Earth, so gravity doesn't touch Earth at all, or neither does Earth's gravity touch the moon.
Just to be clear, the Roche limit is the peak of the normal distribution of gravity. It increases as it comes toward the planet, it decreases as it goes away from the planet, and that tail, goes all the way out to probably maybe 70 or 80 diameters of the Earth. But it's very, very slight. It's not very strong at all.
You see, one of the points, well, I'm not quite sure if that's actually gravity reaching out that far, if it's not the magnetic field and just been labeled wrong. That's my point of this, because I think I think it'll be interesting the way they're going to be, what they're learning at present. A large part of astronomy is going to have to be rewritten, but it won't be rewritten until some of these people with the PhDs that wrote thesis on black energy and dark matter and all of this are dead, because
I'm laughing because you're talking about the high priests of astronomy.
Correct.
But the Chinese have launched quite a few probes to the moon recently, and they know that you only have to power that probe up to a certain point, and then the gravity of the moon will bring it on in, and then you just have to approach moon at the right angle so that you fall into orbit around it.
Sure.
But it's not much gravity. We're talking something 1/6 the mass of the Earth. The Earth holds the moon, in place, but If that moon were to revolve any faster than, say, a 24-day or a 22-day orbit, it might go flying out into space.
Yeah, what's interesting is that the side of the moon that has the largest amount of iron is what's facing Earth.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
exactly like the needle of a compass, you know?
Yeah, the albedo of the moon is only 10 on the side that faces Earth, but it's 60 on the side that faces away from Earth.
Wow. What's also interesting is if iron is playing that large of a factor on what side that the moon is pointing towards Earth, then shouldn't that be an indicator that it's the electromagnetic pull that's affecting the moon and not the gravitational fields?
It's a legitimate question, but it's the iron that coats the side of the moon that faces us has believed to have been deposited during a phenomenon which is called the black axiom, which is where our solar system passed through a point of the heliosphere that was heavy with these dark particles, iron particles, and slow rotating planets got half coated, and fast rotating planets got an even coating all the way around. Well, the moon rotates very slowly, so only the side facing us got coated, and it wasn't that long ago, maybe 25 or 30,000 years, because if we look at the surface of the moon from Earth, there are not many large meteor strikes on the moon. Small ones, but not big ones. So that iron coating has not been there for millions of years.
Well, what's interesting about that iron coating, it's iron oxide, not just regular iron. If it was iron ore instead of iron oxide, but iron oxide is rust.
It's red.
That means it has to be exposed for water and an atmosphere.
Yeah, but iron oxide would be red in color. This is black in color, which means, well, of course, there are 3 different oxidation states of iron, so it could be, not quite completely oxidized iron, which would still be black, but it can't be Fe2O3 because that's bright red.
According to the papers that I've read, which are scientific, they said it was iron oxide. There's a satellite that surveyed I have a copy of which I'll send you. It shows that it's iron oxide on the surface. And the other point is that the material of that they brought back from the moon is slightly electromagnetic, but the moon has never had a magnetic field.
Clay.
No, I didn't say it was completely. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that what was interesting is they showed deposits of iron oxide on the side pointing us because it was facing us because it was that's the side that's pointing to the magnetic field of Earth.
It could be.
And they show where it's at. It's not covering it, but they show where. But the key point, it was not ferrite, it was iron oxide.
Right.
You had to have an atmosphere and water to do that.
Well, there's plenty of water in the soil of the moon, but it's chemical water. And the interesting thing is there's also oxygen in that soil, about 22% by weight, which is pretty close to what our oxygen content is of our atmosphere. Plus, there's about a full meter deep of helium-3.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think they can explain that on a normal situation.
No, they can't.
I think we have a mechanism that shows how the crust was ejected, and it took a large impact. And when you have a large impact, you have 2 levels of heat, so you have to have water to cancel out the heat. You have a logic triangle that you can't beat in the scenario of the Bible, if we look at it correctly. And that explains the creation of the moon, as well as the reason why if the whole world is flooded, where does the water go? Well, you remove crust, and the water goes into that void, which is, remember, Pangea, all the crust was on one side of Earth. Well, that violates physics.
That's true.
If you have a molten Earth and it's forming crust and it's spinning, it's going to evenly be distributed. So the only way that Pangea could exist if it was landlocked. And what's the land used to lock it would be the moon.
Yeah, well, I like Neil Adams' model, which basically says that the continental shelves of all the continents that are visible on Earth were all locked together, and the entire thing was covered in water. And then as the crust expanded, over millions of years, the water just receded from the continents and went into the cracks of the earth it was filling in with molten matter. And there wasn't really a big impact. I mean, not that formed the moon, because the moon is a different age than the earth. It's a different chemical composition than the earth. And the most common astronomical or cosmological theory is now that the moon was either free floating or already here in orbit or in another orbit, and it captured Earth, and Earth ended up in this orbit.
You know what's interesting is when you take the backside of the moon has 4 times more craters than the front side. Physical model for scientists to follow.
So do you think these underground bunkers are a smart idea for these people? Do you think they, being underground 50 or 60 feet, on the side of a hill or something, you think they're going to survive?
You can pay me all the money in the world to go in one of them, and I won't, because the Bible says that is their grave. That is their grave. It says it in the Bible, and it's absolutely correct. You have to survive this. You have to be above ground, not below ground, because all the continents are shifting. Entrances will be sealed shut, and a underground facility does not protect you from a direct hit from one of these meteor showers. The pressure wave will kill you.
Yeah, one of my listeners is saying March is already over. We're talking about March of 2017, not March of 2016.
Right. This object has an exit of either March or April. In other words, the time of Passover. Mm-hmm. This is where it's been documented throughout the biblical records, as well as the Chinese records. And
so basically what we're saying is you have 1 year to get your act together. And, I would think that you should not be spending all your money on a family vacation this summer. You should be spending your money on good food storage, good water storage, some off-dollar or alternative to a dollar hard metal storage, and get your tickets for Jerusalem.
Because you're fulfilling the Almighty's rehearsal patterns. He said, you will hold these forever. And the data clearly states this, that's you're above ground to go through this in Jerusalem, and you make it. It's the ones that go underground and they're on the wrong side of the earth. You have to get those 2 factors correct. You need to be near the pivot point of the tilt, which is going to be around Jerusalem. You have to stay above ground, and you're on the dark side of the earth, not the daylight side.
Gotcha.
The daylight side is plummeted. So.
All right. Well, listen, we have about 1 minute. I don't want the listeners to get panicky about this, because obviously Jerusalem is not going to be able to hold 7 billion people. Does it really make a big difference whether you survive this or whether you don't? In my opinion, no. If your heart, your spirit, your love is in the right place, you're gonna survive. You're gonna live on, even if your body is evaporated in a plasma discharge. You can't die, because you're source. And that's just the way I feel. If I need to be out here helping you all make it, that's what I will do, because it doesn't make any difference to me whether I survive or whether I don't physically. I know spiritually I'm going to survive. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back at the top of the hour with more Gil Broussard, and we're going to talk about what society is going to try to do between now and then. Don't miss a frame of this. We'll be right back. I'm so amazed at how fast 3 hours goes every Sunday evening, especially when we have a great guest like Gil Broussard. One of the things that Gil and I talked about in preparing for this program tonight is how society is going to react. And I don't mean, your local community or your neighborhood or even your town, but we hear a lot of people talking about and being panicked about martial law. Now, I personally don't think martial law will ever be implemented. I think that law enforcement is more likely to be told to go home, and the trained, armed, and paid-for anarchists will be allowed to destroy everything. They're just going to be allowed to take it all apart to distract us from what the real culprit is. And I can tell you, no cop and no soldier is going to stand in the way. They're going to stand back and they're going to watch. That's what I think. What are your thoughts, Gil?
Well, keep in mind, this is going to be a situation that's global. So we don't have enough troops globally. They can only help out in the major cities. So they'll have to use police force in the minor cities for sure. And I don't think it's going to get that bad until after the meteor shower. At the beginning, it'll be a structured way because of terrorism. In SEAL 4, it talks about a quarter of the world population is under the threat of death. It doesn't say quarter of the world population died. That's 1.4 billion, I believe it is. Yep. Well, that is under the threat of death means global terrorism is under a quarter of the world population. Well, that's basically Western nations. So for them to maintain order with terrorism, most people are scared they'll stay home instead of going out. The economy is collapsing. So they'll have to tell people you have to show up for work if you had a job on such and such date to keep things moving. They'll ration food to where everybody has a piece because you have the bail-ins. So they got to ration food, money, and fuel. So that's how you have control. And the people are actually looking at this military and police force as helping them under a situation that's threatening by the terrorists, which these people are the ones that's causing it to start out with, and they're implementing the solution. They're the ones that cause it, and they also implement the solution that benefits them. So that's
we're talking about March 2017. You know, when the peak of things happens, everybody, I mean, just about everybody in the world is watching this presidential election process. We're going through the primary process right now. I've been watching as closely as I can. I called some of my friends in Indiana, and they're telling me that Trump's got it in the bag. Yeah, there's going to be some protests. There's going to be some argument over delegates, but Trump's going to win. He's going to win Indiana, and he's going to win California. So let me ask you a question, Gil. What do you think is awaiting Trump his first few months in office?
If this next March is the true year that this object is going to be coming, which we don't have a sighting in the public realm to verify this yet. If it is, then he just has 3 months or so before total chaos. Matter of fact, you'll start to have a very chaotic situation because everybody can see it. And they'll give a 40-day warning at a certain given point to the globe. And
well, that's about what George W. Bush had. He had about 3 months before September 11th happened. And then before him, you had George Bush Sr., which had the Iraqis invade Kuwait. And then, you know, there in the middle, you sort of had Clinton manufacture the war in Kosovo to try to get his name out of the press really quick. So I don't think it's really that unique that a president is faced with a cataclysm, but not like this, not on a global scale. There's going to have to be somebody has got to be briefing him on what could be facing the world. And that even raises my respect for the man even more, because I'm not sure if I was him, if I wouldn't just say, you know what, screw this. I got the money, I got my family, I'm going to take care of my own, you all can go to hell.
He still needs the data to know where. And if he doesn't have the correct data, if he's assuming the government will have the correct data, and the biblical points out the error that they're going to make. Remember, we don't have a visual, and unless it's close, we can tell what side of Earth. The Bible is already giving the claim on what side of Earth is going to be hit. There's 1/3 of the trees, grass. Later it says rivers. Well, you just described continental crust because they didn't have a word for continental, but they just described it. Yeah. What half of the globe is 1/3 of the continent? That's North and South America. Now, that's a pretty bold statement in every aspect.
And remember, 90% or clearly 85% of every population in the world lives within 20 miles of the coast.
Yes.
So if the oceans leave their bounds, which is clearly described in the Old and New Testaments,
yes,
if you're going to go to the beach, go there, take your picture, and then get ye to the mountaintops. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. You've heard about the island of La Palma, right, in the Canary Islands, that's splitting.
I did not know that. Fill me in on that.
I have a computer model I could send you that shows that when that island breaks off into the ocean, it's going to cause 9 tidal waves to hit the East Coast. The first one is 90 feet tall, followed by 8 more or so.
So we're talking about subsurface avalanches that cause these enormous shock waves in the water.
Well, this island, half of it is falling into the ocean, so you have both above surface and below surface.
Yeah, because an island's just a peak of a mountain. So if you got this mountain is splitting in two, and you got millions of cubic yards of dirt smashing into the water, it's going to create a shock wave.
Right, and it already has a very large fissure across it. The only thing we need is stresses pertaining to this right here, of this planet, and then. We got 21 nuclear facilities on the East Coast. It's not exactly an ideal situation.
True, and we already know that in the face of a tsunami, these nuclear facilities don't fare well.
See, one of the things they have to create, if they create terrorism where there's less people going to work and less need for electricity because they can't pay their bills, then they can start turning off some of these nuclear power facilities, powering them down. But they need a reason without telling the public, hey, I'm turning off all of the nuclear power facilities. They can't do that. They would cause a panic. So this will cause the circumstance for them to start powering down the nuclear facilities, because that will be a problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, if that happens,
they cannot take a meteor hit. They cannot take a meteor hit.
We're not talking about just cell phones and iPads and internet going down. We're talking about the power to the drugstore. So if you're a diabetic, you're in trouble. If you're a heart patient, you got to have blood pressure medicine to keep your blood pressure from blowing out the top of your head. You're in trouble. You are going to need to put together a 6-month to a year supply of your drugs if you're going to survive this, because CVS and Walgreens and Walmart local pharmacy, they're not going to be having anything in stock, folks.
That's the reason why they have that clause in the Obamacare plan. They can dictate whether or not you get the medicine or not. It's basically turning off the medicines that can save you. It's legal euthanasia.
Legal euthanasia. Wow.
And they will be using it for this situation here.
Just like the Russians did, or the Soviets did during World War I, and just like
the Nazis did.
Yeah, the Nazis did too. Reduce the population, reduce the stress on non-productive society being supported by working class people. And right now, take a look around, folks. At least here in Charlotte, our unemployment rate is above 11% here. In some workforces like engineering, it's close to 16%. 16%. That's higher than during the Depression. Just take a look around. We are being financially stressed.
Anything as far as the numbers that the government gives, you can add almost another 40 to 50% to that. So it's higher than because a lot of people are not even are no longer on the books. They just on their own.
Sure, absolutely. And, the thing about, and I've discussed this before on this program, in 1929, when the crash occurred, it mostly affected the cities. That's where people were in soup lines. That's where makeshift work had to be done. That's where the CCC was created. But in the rural areas, America was more agrarian. We farmed, we ranched, and they didn't really suffer from the unemployment. The wages went down, and the amount of money that you needed to live on, of course, went way down. But rural areas survived because people could just plant more crops. There were plenty of workers around. You could plant more crops, potatoes and corn and everything, and people traded and bartered, and they survived. But in the cities, it was disastrous. Now we don't have an agrarian society like we had in 1929. Most people are urban, dwellers, and they won't be able to survive that kind of cutoff from processed foods.
That is absolutely correct.
And that's why the unemployment ratio has hurt us so badly. When we sit at 16%, which in the Depression,
that's in between the entry and exit path of this planet, and that's Saturn, and that's the one that the moons of this planet is warped. Okay, so and we're there's also another study that shows that our moon, the orbit of our moon is extended, like something's tugging on it. Remember, we have those lasers, these reflectors?
Yes,
they're
able
to measure that quite accurately. So we have an object that's very near because it's affecting our inner orbits of our comets, our asteroids, our moons of our planets, and such. You don't get that from something that's outside our universe.
Interesting. One other thing I would like to cover as far as society is, over the last, I'm going to say 80 years, I think, in my opinion, we've become less of a religious nation. We've become more splintered. Our relationship with God, our dependence upon God for our happiness has been diminished. And that's in my opinion. It may not be true in your local community. Maybe you're very strong in your tradition, and that's fine. But I think overall, the nation is suffering about what bathroom to use, for crying out loud, or what constitutes marriage. And I think because of that, we're not being as prosperous. We're not prospering in the land because we're not being blessed. So most people out there can't save enough money to add these extra resources to their preparations. What would you recommend? Now, if you ask people the question, if I could tell you 12 months before the end of time or the end of this beginning of this cataclysm, would you prepare for it, or would you just keep going the way that you're going, worrying about what's the next rock concert you're going to go to, and are you going to make it to your manicure on time? What do you recommend people do?
I'm not a financial advisor. I can just say what I've done on my personal level, and I've stocked up some food, and I'm also running short on cash to better do it properly. But I made a small misinvestment in the dinar, the Iraqi dinar. The Iraqis have just been told that they've met all of the requirements of Article 8. And one of the stipulations in Article 8 is that they have to have a tradable currency. I think we're only weeks away at the most, if not just days away, from it being a revalued currency. And that would be a huge blessing for a lot of people very quickly.
Now, I know a lot of my friends, maybe a dozen of my friends, that own millions of Iraqi dinar. What does this mean for them? If you've been buying dinar, by the way, I think you can buy 1,000 dinar for $10. Is that right? Something like that? Or is 1,000 dinar for a penny?
For a dollar.
For a dollar, that's what it is. Yeah, it's 1,000 to 1.
And the dinar used to be, it took $3 to be one dinar, before the war. And that's where the Kuwaiti dinar is. And the Iraqi dinar was within 15% of the Kuwaiti dinar, which that's where it needs to head to. So it may take maybe 2 to 3 rises in the market for it to reach that. But that's where it's heading to.
Now, when was the dinar taken off the world trade market?
I don't have the exact date, but shortly after they conquered Saddam, about a year or so later, they had added sanctions, and they reduced the value of the dinar because of Saddam. But then they eliminated the old dinar with Saddam's picture, and they reprinted some brand new currencies.
Ah, I see.
Which is what the value, which is that value we're talking about, is going to be.
How hard is it to buy? Where do you go to get some?
One of the places that I bought was exchangeofamerica.com, and there's another one called Treasury Vault, if you like to do a little leveraging on the amount. But $250, which is basically like about a night out on the town if you had a date, today, could easily, the return value may get you just over $1 million. So it doesn't take much money to get a pretty good return if it goes back up to its original rate of around $3.
And it's available right now, right?
Yes. Oh, yes. Right now. But if it revalues, let's say Tuesday or Wednesday, which there's even a little bit of talk passing around there, that, they need 4 days of a vacation to revalue their currency during that time period when the government is down, when there's no markets moving. Well, they're in that 4-day period right now. So if it's not this one, it means the next one is Ramadan, which is 6 weeks later, which is unlikely. They're not supposed to work during Ramadan. So there's a high probability. I can't say it's 100%, but all I can say is the probability is high that when they come back from their vacation, which is May 4th, that shortly after that, we may have a revalued currency there.
And so if the currency revalues, let's say you buy 1 million Iraqi dinar for $250, and it revalues, what do you think will be the initial exchange rate for a dinar to dollar?
Estimates puts it about $1.50 at the first rising, maybe another $1.50 after that. They need to get it within 15% of the Kuwaiti dinar, and that's about, I think, about $3.40. Don't quote me on that, but it's somewhere around there. It's pretty high. The Kuwaiti.
And in your opinion, they haven't overprinted the Iraqi dinar. There's not going to be massive deflation of the currency like what happened to the ruble.
No, matter of fact, they put in some paper articles. They're planning on building the world's largest tower in Basra. You ought to see it. It's called The Bride. Well, if they're going to be broke, why are they building the world's largest tower? When they can only do that if they're revaluing their currency. And matter of fact, Iraq's going to be probably the second or third largest producer of oil coming up.
That's true. Now,
because it reserves.
Somebody made the observation that the World Bank and the oil.
Well, they just took the dollars, their reserves of dollars. They bought 12 tons of gold. That was maybe 4 or 5 months back. And they're probably going to be doing another gold purchase coming up again. But they're going to wait till after that movement in the currency because they'll have a greater value. But
you think it's going to be a gold-backed currency?
I think eventually most will. I think they're going to go with asset-backed currency. So the Iraqi assets, their gold, their oil, and other natural resources are already essayed. They already have a book value on that. So after they revalue their currency to a normal market, if it calls for them to move to a Basel III agreement, they can if they wish to, because they've already fulfilled the paperwork on having their assets, that their net worth as a nation, as that requirement requires. Now, keep in mind, the IMF has been having boots on the ground for over 2 months there.
Sure.
And they agree to whatever legislation they write for them to get the banking laws and the laws that protects international investors to go in are all passed now. Okay? They've been approving and legislating and passing these for 2 months right now at a exponential rate. They've been going through that like it's, they're getting prepared for something.
They are getting prepared for something if they're doing that. That's exactly right. So, I mean, we know that a lot of individuals, a lot of your friends, a lot of my friends, a lot of listeners to this program own Iraqi dinar. But also, the U.S. Treasury owns a lot of dinar. What do you think will happen to the U.S. debt, not the deficit, but the debt, if the Iraqi dinar revalues?
Well, not just the U.S., but all the multinational forces that went into Iraq, they've all accepted a certain amount of the dinar in hopes that when it's, not hopes, but they already know it's going to be revalued. And all of their war debt, plus more than that, will be paid off. Remember, Bush made the comment, this war won't cost us anything. And I have the congressional report that stated they were planning to reissue a new currency. It even said that. It was secret for the first 5 years. And now it's public records. Now you can get it. I can send you a copy of that.
Okay, I'd appreciate that. I do know that there's a lot of conflict going on now in the Middle East. Somebody's trying to form a caliphate. ISIS is a clever marketing plan to try to attract some kind of bombing or warfare, which they're not even going to be involved in. They're going to step out of the way and let us wipe out something. But I recall in 1980 when President Reagan was elected, for 444 days, we had hostages held by Iran, and there wasn't, it seemed, anything anybody could do about it. But somehow, miraculously, the next day after Reagan's inaugural address, those hostages were released. Oh, you bet it does.
So, depending on what debris that you picked up, if it's meteor debris, and whether or not they average the age using the contamination from meteors, which is from some other instant, versus the surface of it, I still stand with the conclusion the moon came from the Earth, because it answers a lot of questions.
Well, it does, and you can look at the Gulf of Mexico and say, okay, that's a pretty deep chasm. It's 5,500 meters deep, and that's unlike the lake beds that make up Texas and Mexico, and it's quite possible that something struck the Earth there. But I have to go with what we typically call Dalton's law, which means that in any given liquid or gaseous body, the elements in that liquid or gaseous body are going to evenly distribute. And that's why it makes it unlikely that the moon came from the Earth, because of its very high concentration of titanium and aluminum compared to the Earth. Well, I'm just making my case. You're making yours, and I totally respect that.
Isn't uranium in the United States, mostly in Arizona, Nevada,
that's
and
a good point.
Just in a few western? Why isn't it evenly spread? So that breaks that law, right there. That you expect things to be evenly spread. It's not proven in nature on Earth. So why should we expect that off of the Earth?
Well, that's a good point, but you're talking about the heaviest element in nature, 235 grams per mole.
Sure.
Aluminum and iron and all that is lightweight compared to uranium. And
right.
And there's a lot of uranium in Russia. There's a lot of uranium in India as well.
Well, the largest deposit of aluminum is out of Brazil. So if it's evenly spread, why is it concentrated there again?
It's just near the surface. That's all I'm saying.
That's it.
The surface is definitely been hammered a lot, and we're lucky to be alive on this planet.
Sure, that it is. That it has. And now keep in mind that we don't know if it was the back side of the crust or the top side, we call it. We don't know what side it's facing.
That's true.
Whenever it went back together, and NASA shows some pictures like it's like in big sections that it formed the moon. So depending on which section, whether it was flipped over or on top, we'd have a different chemical deposit. Some of the areas of the moon test very similar to the bottom of our ocean on some of the core samples. Whenever you get past the sediment that just dropped to the bottom, and you get down into the core, it matches some of the surfaces of our oceans. So
it could. I'm just saying uranium could be unique because of its weight, and it does go from Arizona all the way up to Oregon, and then it's also spread all over Russia. Russia has 20% of the world's uranium mines, so that would be a little bit odd. Uranium is so heavy, and it also gets mixed into lava when it comes to the surface. So we get radioactive lava, we get uranium decays and forms very, very small particles, almost gaseous, and they come up through lightly porous rock and make their way to the surface in the form of radon gas. That's a direct daughter of uranium. And then we get thorium and sodium-40, and it's a lot of lightweight daughters to uranium, but it's thank goodness it's deep in the earth.
I have a question for you, since you're a chemist. You might be able to help me out on this. I came across a Encyclopedia Britannica, and it was one volume. It was the volume A. I opened it up, and it went to atomic. And on that page, I saw a man-made cave that they did with a atomic weapon. There was probably a issue of somewhere in the 50s. This encyclopedia was. What was interesting is when I read the caption underneath, it was like just 2 or 3 weeks after the explosion. Okay? And they're in there with short sleeves. And what was amazing is that this picture was perfectly clear. They only had film cameras. There was no streaks on the film of this picture. And there was no heat value because they were just casual. They were not in special suits. So I'm curious, why isn't, I would expect that to be contaminated for thousands of years.
It's not contaminated for thousands of years in the sense that you can't go in there, but there's a lot of alpha decay. Alpha decay occurs when the neutrons come flying out of that explosion, and the neutrons stick to stuff. They stick to iron and tin and calcium and all kinds, and then they come off. And it could take a couple of months for that to occur. If those alpha particles strike your body, they will kill tissue. It's like wide open chemotherapy right there on your body. Now,
and shouldn't it shriek the film?
Absolutely.
The camera?
It will expose film. What do you think a dental x-ray is?
Well, thank you. So, because I was wondering how come that picture was so clear, there was no streaks whatsoever.
I think they faked it. They didn't take that picture inside that cave, because they would have been breathing that stuff, and every single one of those people would be dead within a year.
That's what I found so confusing about that picture. Thank you.
Yeah, but the fallout now inside there, some of it will have a half-life of 12,500 years. Does that make it really dangerous? Not really, because the decay is so slow that it takes long exposure to really do body damage. What you're looking for is the short decay stuff that decays in 125 hours or 12 days. This is the stuff that'll kill you, and it'll kill you quickly.
Yeah. You ever seen a white paper report on the amount of thorium and plutonium and stuff that comes out of a coal power plant exhaust?
I have not. I've run a coal fire plant before, and honestly, we did spectrographic analysis of the gas all the time. We have to do it live in order to blend the overfire air and the underfire air to get the maximum amount of CO2 and not so much CO. But we don't really monitor for radioactivity. I never understood why either, because coal can be radioactive.
Oh, it is tremendously. There's a tremendous amount. There's a study done. I have a study that shows the amount. Matter of fact, a coal power plant releases more radioactive material than any nuclear power plant does. And people don't know that. If you're downwind from that, that's where you get mostly your background radiation. Because if you go west of the Sierra Madres or to the Hawaiian Islands, there's no background radiation there.
That's interesting.
It's because of the fallout of the industrial age because of coal.
Now, I've been to the West Coast, and I went from San Francisco all the way up to the border between California and Oregon, and I took readings about every 40 miles, right there at where the water meets the sand. And I got readings no different than what I got here in North Carolina, between 18 and 24 counts per minute. And this was a broad spectrometer. This was not a Geiger counter. This was a digital unit. And I was surprised because I was looking for Fukushima fallout. I was going to write a paper on it, and I didn't find any evidence, so I didn't write the paper.
Thank you. I was wondering whether or not there was actual, if someone ever did that with a broad spectrum analysis type thing, because, you know...
Well, keep in mind, that's at sea level. So if I really wanted to do it right, I would have taken helium balloons and sent them up to 1,000 feet and then 2,000 feet and take aerial samples, but I didn't do that.
Well, it's pretty good to see whether or not it actually fell on the land in the area.
It's true.
Because it's been going on for over you know, I don't know how many years it is now. So if there's anything...
I found a restaurant up on a cliff. It was about, I'm going to say 500 feet off the water. It was way up there. And I sat out on the deck and had my lunch and left my detector on the table in front of me to see if I could pick up anything. And it just sat there around 28, 27. Nothing to be alarmed about.
Well, send me a copy of your Mr. Detector wherever you had bought it.
Yeah, sure.
I'm interested in your gear.
They're not really expensive. This one was about $300. It's it will tell you if you do get a species. It will tell you what the main peak is, and you can sort of pan through it. It has a little screen on it. My old one, I used a sodium iodide crystal, and I hooked it to my laptop. That was the premium unit, but I don't have a crystal right now. Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back at the bottom of the hour. More Gil Broussard coming at you. Don't go away. My guest tonight is Gil Broussard, who was on the program April 15th of 2015, and we talked about the approach of a 10th planet from out there somewhere on a regular elliptical orbit into our solar system. It has, in the past, according to historical and scriptural record, caused great havoc on this planet. We don't really know what it's going to do this time. This segment, we're going to talk a little bit about what can be expected if you have beachfront property, and maybe what you can do to prepare. And then the following hour, we're going to talk about, basically what's happening with the race of mankind and why you see governments acting so weird if they know what we're talking about tonight. So, day getting very long on one side of the earth and a night getting very long on the other side of the earth.
Well, that bulge would start to spread out from the equator. Your tides around this equator would actually get less, and tides in the north and southern upper hemispheres would rise, maybe 100 feet or so.
Oh my gosh. So we're talking 30, 40, 50th parallel. We're talking about 40 to 75 foot tides. Yeah. And then whenever you're looking at the Earth tilting, in a 6-hour period of 26 to 28 degrees, you're looking at about roughly 1,800 miles within that 6 hours. Well, you can do the calculation. 1,800 mile travel in 6 hours. It's roughly 300 mile an hour winds, but you got resistance. But on open water, you're looking at severe winds and tidal waves associated with those winds. So that's a little bit, about 30% more powerful than an F5 tornado.
Yeah, and that's where grass doesn't stay in the ground for F5. Now, when it's on land, because of mountainous and dry factors of the wind, you're probably looking at 150 mile an hour winds. But that's only if you're 90 degrees from the pivot point of the tilt. The data, if you extract the data from the Bible, it appears that one of the safe areas would be around the Persian Gulf region or Jerusalem area, would be one of the pivot points where you draw a line through. And then, in other words, the Arctic zone would come down to about where Washington, D.C. is, the Arctic zone. Well, you have a lot of nuclear facilities.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, the specs for those nuclear facilities are not built for the Arctic zones with 150 mile an hour winds, where your rivers will freeze solid. Therefore, you lose your cooling water, and that's if the cooling pipes don't rupture during the process, and your diesel in your generators that is a backup system freezes.
Yeah, it's going to freeze. So if we know that's going to happen and it's approaching, we have some weeks to prepare. That's long enough to power down the nuclear power plants, pull the fuel, sink the rods in, cool everything down, and just let it sit idle until this passes by. Bury the nuclear fuel in lead boxes and put it deep in the earth. We got plenty of time to do that. And then after it passes, bring it back out and try to fire up the nuclear power plants. But it could still take a couple of years to get electricity going again.
Without a doubt, because when you go through the plasma tail of this planet, like a comet, if you ever seen the video, I don't know if you have you seen a video on a comet Siding Springs when it passed near Mars?
Yeah, where you're talking about interplanetary lightning bolts.
It lit up the entire planet. Remember, this is just a small little rock in space. When that tail hit that large planet versus size, it lit up that entire planet. Now, let's reverse the model. The planet is about 7 times larger than Earth, and we're going to be hit by its lightning. And we're into its plasma tail. Whatever side of Earth that's facing the daylight side, that's getting the extreme plasma from that, it's going to weaken the magnetic field temporarily, probably. And that side of Earth will be facing a massive EMP strike, basically. So they'll have to turn off globally all generators for about 3 days.
Oh, not only that, but if you're talking about plasma discharges, plasma looks for ground wires. Now, if it hits the Earth, it's gonna light up a forest fire like nothing you've ever seen, like the Chicago fire. But if it hits these aluminum high tension lines, that acts like a giant antenna, and it just focuses all that energy right into those 13.8 auto transformers that are in those switch yards all across the country, and it cooks those babies. And
exactly.
There are no spares of that. No spares.
Exactly.
And we're talking about billions of volts. We're talking about thousands of farads of energy. This, I don't know, I'm trying to use units people can understand, but, a normal lightning bolt is maybe the size of your leg, and it extends maybe 2 miles. Or maybe 3 miles from the cloud to the ground once the ion path is created. And it flashes until there's not enough electrons to make the jump, and then it stops. We're talking a bolt that's maybe 4 to 8 kilometers in diameter, and it doesn't go up 10,000 feet. It goes out maybe 200 kilometers out into space, where this plasma field is just outside the magnetosphere, and it connects the two.
There's an example of this because remember during Hezekiah, it tilted the earth, shadow went backwards 26, which I believe was the last time it passed close to earth, was during 700 BC time frame. And so I kind of estimate that somewhere on earth, possibly, that we would see evidence of a plasma strike of some, unless they hit the ocean, then it wouldn't.
Now you're talking about the time of Sodom and Gomorrah, right?
No, I'm talking about the Hezekiah's time. Remember, in Hezekiah, the shadow went backwards.
Oh, yeah. Right before the destruction of Israel in 600 right. BC. I got you.
But it wasn't a sundial. When you go back to the Hebrew text, it says steps. And if the steps were facing south, that happens to add up to a 26 to 28 degree tilt. That meant it had to have a close approach for it to do that. Well, in Africa, there's an area called the Eye of the Sahara. That circular discharge crater, which is not concave and has been proven that it's not a meteor impact, is a plasma crater. And it's 30 miles across.
Yeah, so there you go. That's about the size of an interplanetary discharge, something that size.
Created by a planet many times larger than us. That would equal out to a 30-mile crater. So we have evidence that links that we've had close calls in the past. It's whether or not we choose to recognize them, because I was pretty stubborn at that. I was a hardened skeptic. It took a lot of evidence before I had to reverse, because I didn't have enough. My grip was firmly loosened, to where I had to change my opinion that there is an object that has come through our system multiple times.
Well, in the scientific method, we call that the null hypothesis, where you're trying to prove something false and you're unable to do it. That's called the null hypothesis. And I think it's a more legitimate way to do science, because scientists, especially if they're PhDs, and I will say this with all honesty, they suffer from cognitive dissonance. If there's some piece of evidence that comes along that doesn't fit their hypothesis, doesn't fit the way they want to take this paper and defend it, they'll throw the evidence out. And that's why we're stuck the way we're stuck right now. So we have about 15 minutes left in this segment, and I want to cover, or at least start to cover this, because it's a big subject. What is it that the scriptures say people should do to prepare for this close past? Because this is going to be chaotic.
Yes, when we bring back, when things are translated, like from Hebrew to Latin to Greek all the way to English, and then we try to then through multiple cultures and everything, sometimes it's lost in translation. You can see that if you ever speak different languages or visit different cultures, you can clearly see certain evidence to that.
And the ones that inherit the scriptures, sometimes they alter things to fit their, their view of history.
There is clear evidence that that's what happened with our Bible today compared to what the original Hebrew is stating.
I think so.
So if we go back to the original, like we call things feast days, and we call them the Jewish feast days. When you go back and look at what it literally says, these are the Almighty's Nekraz, which means rehearsals. He gave you a rehearsal to practice, and it prepares you at certain times in history where this thing has passed. I'm not through with my study. My study is still continuing. But so far, from what I've gathered so far, I've been able to link with this either being on a Sabbath or Jubilee year when it has passed. And guess what? The Hebrews, on those 2 years, the rehearsal pattern is for you to stock up 1 year of food and supplies for this period of time. And he's telling you ahead of time to do that, because somewhere along the line, CO3 and 4, CO3 is economic collapse, CO4, there's a famine involved. Well, for his people to be prepared without him picking up the phone and sending you like an email or a text message, only way you can do it is follow the instructions he put in in the first 5 books of the Bible. He says, on these 2 years, you shall gather food and supplies, and you get out of debt. Well, if you're what you call when your equity drops below a certain level versus your loan, you're upside down on your mortgage. Well, think about this on everything, your car, everything. So it says get out of debt, because the dollar's going to be falling.
And it's going to fall in a very weird way. The last time the dollar fell, prices fell with it. But this time, we've artificially pumped that dollar to a value that it's not supposed to be at. It's probably 20 to 25 times its real value. When it falls, you're going to see prices go up, not down. You're going to see massive inflation, like 1,200 to 1,500% inflation. Not only will the dollar be worthless, but you won't be able to buy anything with it.
I'm actually expecting a two-way.
That means hard metals, silver, gold, and in increments that you can, buy, sell, and trade with. But what about this preparation? In the New Testament, it talks about the 10 virgins, the parable of the 10 virgins. You have 5 virgins that prepare and get the oil and trim their wicks and all. And you got 5 virgins that kind of dilly-dally, and they have to rush out and get their oil, and then they're not able to get back into the wedding. I think, honestly, Gil, most people are like the five foolish virgins. They don't have any storage, and they don't plan on getting any until the stuff starts hitting the fan. Then they're going to try and run out and get it, and by then it's going to be too late.
That is absolutely correct, because he said, wide is the path for the destruction of the wicked. Again, an ancient word, wicked and evil today is almost synonymous. Not back when this was written. They meant two different total definitions. Evil is one who is without moral righteousness whatsoever. But the wicked is one who's been blending. They have one thread of truth, one thread of falseness, and they intertwine. So you can be blending paganism, like often, just like I just said. They say that it's a feast, and that is the feast of the Jews. Well, they twisted what it actually says. He says, you will hold these forever. These are my rehearsal patterns that you're to follow.
And let's talk a little bit about the feast, because these are calendar punctuators. They do go with the phases of the moon. They do go with spring and summer, but they're a lot more accurate because, for instance, the Feast of Barley, when you're looking at the ripening of the barley as an indicator that this is about to happen, what does that mean for people that don't study the Hebrew? What does that mean for them?
It's getting in tune with Scripture and what he says to look for. And then barley is kind of in question because it doesn't literally come out and state that, but it kind of refers to that the grain is supposed to be new. Therefore, the first grain that does appear is barley. Now, that's associated with the equinox, which is the first sign of the year starting.
So that's March 21st. What we consider March 21st, what the Druids and all that built Stonehenge so that they could mark that day. That's the spring equinox.
All ancient civilizations had these ancient astronomical areas where they had markers, where they knew where the shadow came back at zero, to where they could keep count how many days a year actually was. Before Hezekiah, the calendar year was 360. After Hezekiah, it was 365 and a quarter.
So Earth slowed down.
And not necessarily. Now, that's an hour if you slow down. No, this is the year. So Earth's orbital path around the sun increased outward, less than 1% or so of how many miles
I see. So the orbit actually expanded.
Because this planet came close enough to us to drag us outward in our magnetic trough that we're locked in to the outer edges of that magnetic trough.
Very interesting.
Orbit is slightly outward, and that gave us the extra few days that we have right now as a calendar.
Very interesting.
Again, it's all coming up to where if we follow literally what he's saying in the way that he originally said it, he's giving us enough information from day one now. Remember, there's only one person who can see that far in the future. That's the Almighty, and he wrote this ahead of time for us. He says, whenever you see this sign in heaven, make your way to Jerusalem. Because he said, every year you're going to practice my Mikra in Jerusalem. That's Passover.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And guess what? Elijah's going to show up for this feast of Passover. And he will announce the return of the Messiah for his bride. See, those foolish and wise virgins, well, when you study a Hebrew wedding, you can identify those as not being a bride, but as the bridemaid.
Ah, exactly.
The bridemaid carries lamps. The bride does not. So you got two
That's
groups.
Exactly right.
So the Hebrew, the 144,000 is the bride, but these are the bridemaid. They're 5 times more them than the bride, and they're from any tribe. The bride is, it says specifically, they're from the Hebrew tribes, but not the bridemaid, and that's 5 times more of them.
So interesting.
And 40% of that group doesn't make it. They're the foolish, or 50% of the bridemaids. But overall, if you add up the numbers, it's 40% don't make it to the place of safety. He says, go away because I don't know you. If he actually said that, he may have said, "Go away, you don't have it right," or something else. But whatever way, they're turned back, and they're put into jail for 10 days before their heads are cut off. And that's
my gosh.
That's their. And who's cutting off heads?
ISIS. So, yeah.
There you go.
Well, let me try to finish this in this segment. We got 5 minutes, and then we'll go into another portion of this. There is a drive for just about every neighborhood in every part of the world to get to safety. And I think a lot of them, they don't want to go to Jerusalem. So it looks like the elite are trying to prepare to survive while leaving the rest of us to fend for ourselves out in the elements. And they're doing it by spending their money to build shelters and to put their storage together so they can make it. Are they doing the right thing, or are they going to be wiped out in their bunkers in the United States and Russia and Europe by not making it to Jerusalem?
See, like right now, they don't know what side of the earth is going to be hit by a meteor shower. So they have three main positions: Russia, China, and the U.S.
Right.
As areas that they can evacuate. This is only for the elite. Okay? They're going to use normal astronomy to predict, okay, the Middle East. They are going to predict the Middle East, Europe, Africa is going to be hit. Then they're going to go underground on this side. But there's only a biblical model that shows us when we go through the plasma tail, that Earth will slow down by 12 hours, changing the opposite side as being the target zone. The daylight side of Earth is going to be hit by a meteor shower in March. It says in there, remember where it says the parables of the ten virgins. The wise have two portions of oil. One portion burns for 12 hours. The wise have two 12-hour portions. The foolish only have one. That tells you that night is 24 hours. It's twice as long.
I see.
That's pointing to a 12-hour delay. And then it states that the Almighty sends 4 angels to stop the winds. Only way you can stop the winds is if you stop the rotation of the earth. The data is there. And there's only a biblical model that's stating how Earth can slow down by 12 hours. There's no...
I get the feeling that this will be such a magnificent upgrade, let's call it, to the U.S. debt situation related to all the wars in the Middle East. And I think they'll delay this revaluation till after Trump is elected, because there's no way in hell anybody wants to give Obama credit for something George W. Bush put together.
Well, that may not be what we would want, but it might be the plans of the Illuminati want, because they need to go back to sleep. It's not your time yet, because we know that peace agreement is going to be broken 3.5 years later.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So SEAL 5 is because they're sending the alert. They're seeing a peace agreement happen, and the candidate.
Well, we got a break coming up. Let's go ahead and take this break. And then I'm going to talk to you about Great American Military. Why maybe this is fantastic. Right back after this. Don't go away. More X-Squared Radio. I love that song, Civil Twilight, by the way, if you want to know who that is. Letters from the Sky. It was the final song played in the movie I Am Number 4. You might recognize it. Gil Broussard is my guest. We're in the final segment. I want to bring this up because it fits so nicely, so neatly into what we have been discussing. What do you do when you don't have a lot of money and you want to make some good investments that will be usable when this begins to come apart? How are you going to get from one point to another? If you do have a chance to get to Jerusalem, how are you going to get there if all you have is a suitcase full of $20 bills? I doubt you're going to make it. And this article is, of course, done by Jim Willey, whose his website is goldenjackass.com. And if you want to have access to any of the notes that I use in the program here at X Squared Radio, you need to go to the network's website, which is truthfrequencyradio.com, and then put /X2 radio. Right there on tonight's episode, May 1st, 2016, will be the link to a web page that contains all of these files. Every single time I go on the air, my whole 35-page plus links reference material is also uploaded. So you can do your own research on top of what we can barely squeeze into 3 hours here, especially with an excellent guest like Gil. For the last year or more, not an elephant, not a gorilla, but a dragon has been found at the dinner table. Its breath has just made everybody at the table totally bald with some scorched red faces. Now, everybody at the table is looking at each other, wondering who will first mention the bald guys at the table. Here's the deal. The Shanghai levers are finally functioning, starting with the gold fix and continuing with the RMB. RMB is Chinese money, known as yuan, based gold futures contract. This delivers gold, metal, oddly, into your hands, a small amount with each bill. The game is finally on, as in the climax chapter to the end game. Paper gold is totally disconnected from fundamentals. The paper charade is as impressive as it is corrupt. I'm sure you know what alchemy is. Alchemy is the ancient science of turning base metals like lead into gold. Why? Because lead is so plentiful and gold is so rare. Well, this group has succeeded in turning road gravel into gold. No. Paper, little wood fibers, and even worse than that, little zeros and ones. They have succeeded in making you believe that it is worth gold. It's a fraud. And what is being done right now with the real metal, gold and silver, is they're being horribly shorted to a terrible ratio. It was considered outrageous 2 years ago when at only 25 to 1 or 40 to 1, we had a difference of these gold contracts. And now we're seeing 300 to 1. It is outrageously undervalued. Imagine the lunacy of even 5 to 6 people claiming ownership to your car or your house, or better yet, your summer cottage by the lake. You go on vacation, and there's 4 other families parked in the driveway. You see how crazy that is? Well, that's exactly what they've done with gold. They've sold it over and over and over again, the same gold. Currently, the number of contracts on the COMEX represents 300 times as much paper gold as there is physical metal in the COMEX vaults. That's called being short on the gold. What's going to happen if it goes up, if it goes long, and people start wanting it? They don't have it to deliver. You see what a problem that can occur. The moving average crossover for the 20-week average above the 50-week average is a very reliable signal confirmed by the Stochastics Cyclical Index. Gold is going to prevail, and it will complete the upside breakout. Right now, it is really cheap. It's like $1,100 per ounce, and it should be somewhere around $2,000 an ounce. And silver should be around 10% the price of gold. But right now, silver just recently dropped down to $14 an ounce, and as soon as the Chinese announced that they were going to issue this gold-backed currency, it jumped $2 in one day. If you owned silver at that time, you would have made pretty close to 15% on your money in one day. And it's now headed for $18. So if you're going to buy silver, now is the time. 1 ounce bars, 5 ounce bars, 10 ounce bars. Buy what you can afford, because it's a great buy right now. It has been shorted into the basement, and it's a great time for average investors that can scrape $20 together to buy an ounce of gold. Now, I want to get Gil's feeling on this, because what we're talking about is an extremely nefarious and very well organized. We're talking about trillions of dollars that are being leveraged to make this happen by a very small group of people. Who do you think this group of people is, Gil, and what in the world are they trying to accomplish?
Well, it's basically the Illuminati and the Hindenburgs. I never thought that they existed at first because I didn't really believe in any of these conspiracy theories. But I was lucky enough to meet a gentleman and sit at his kitchen table and listen to a conversation that a Yale graduate friend of mine was having with him. They were speaking about the Hindenburgs and the
Bilderbergs?
Yes, the Bilderbergs and the Trilateral. This gentleman was the richest man twice in his life in the world. He was the richest man in the world twice. And he was very well traveled, and everything. So they were speaking about this. And I was listening in kind of in awe and amazement for 45 minutes before I even decided to speak. And then I had to say something because I said, gentlemen, can I stop you for a moment? Can I ask you a question and say, I said, y'all are speaking as if these Hindenburgs and the Trilaterals are real. And they both stopped to me and said, oh, yes, they're real. And they went on to explain. See, each gentleman there was a president of the John Birch Society in their own town.
Ah, I see.
And the John Birch Society fights for our constitutional rights. Remember that Korean flight that got shot down by the Russians because it traveled into the airspace? They said it was a spy plane.
Yeah.
And it was actually a passenger plane.
Right.
Well, the president of the John Birch Society and one of our congressmen was on that plane.
Wow.
They're making too much headway onto our constitutional rights. These are the people that control our banking, our community, creates the wars, and they create the problems, and they also create the solutions for you, or begging for it. Well, I have a different opinion on the way the economy is going to go.
Okay.
Because of the terrorism, the way it's going to be implemented against the economy, and the lack of work, I see the value of things falling tremendously before they go skyrocketing. So I'm saying that, remember how you said they published too much paper on gold?
Sure.
Well, they're not going to be liable for that. They're not going to have any backlash. The reason why, they're going to make people not want it, to where they're going to drop the price of gold, I think, for a while, until it's the right time for them to rise it. But they're going to allow people to void those papers or ask for a small amount instead. That's how you're going to make those papers that are written 4 to 5 times over what is physical gold, is to reduce the value a lot. And then after this, when they have a war in the Middle East, keep in mind that it's going to have a war in the Persian Gulf region, and oil is going to be rare, so they're going to be rationing oil, but oil is going to go through the roof because it's scarcity. So you have one that's going up and one that's down, which is gold, because the same people control oil and gold prices.
Sure.
So now you got oil at high prices and gold at very low. Then whenever they're ready, they'll lower the oil and raise the gold to where it's back to a normal level. And that would be where things go back up to a high level. But the average person holding gold is going to lose it because they can't afford to hold on to it. This is going to be desperate times.
Well, I mean, most people that listen to this program know what quantitative easing is. Quantitative easing is like a death warrant to the dollar. They pump artificial money into the dollar market to artificially create strength in it. We have an enormously strong dollar, and it shouldn't be. And it has created an enormous trade deficit with us because American dollars should be buying a lot of foreign goods, but it's not because nobody wants it. When the dollar falls, we're not going to be able to buy foreign goods very well. So what we have here is assured mutual destruction. It's like mad, mutually assured destruction. Now, bear in mind that we're talking about gold being linked to currency, but not silver. Not silver. The honest inflation adjustment was calls for the 1980 high to occur at about $150 an ounce for silver. It remains realistic, especially given the increasing usage of silver in industrial use, like phones and circuits and computers and drugs. Silver is being consumed, not just made into gold or not into jewelry and bars. And the other thing to consider here is that nothing has been repaired since 2008. No big bank liquidations have occurred. No currency reform has occurred. The banking reform has been a complete sham. It was run by the big banks themselves. And you heard Bernie Sanders say during the debate that he wasn't going to let government try to reorganize the big banks. He was going to leave it up to them, which is what they've been doing already. Banker power has been preserved. It has not been regulated. It hasn't been cut back at all. So Western bank power is going to evaporate. And this is all going to be taken over by the transatlantic banks and the BRICS. They're going to control everything. The only metal that's really should float to its natural value, because they're going to lose control of it, is silver.
It's possible.
It's got to go that way.
But I'm leaning hard on a low value currency that has high oil resources,
like the Iraqi dinar. That's definitely
right. That's the only one that I see that is undervalued versus its resources.
Okay.
And so right now what I do after that, maybe I'll buy silver after that. After I see a panic where it may cause it to fall a little bit shortly before it rises. But metals are going to rise eventually, but I think there's going to be things falling first.
Well, if you make $2 or $3 million U.S. or buying power off the Iraqi dinar, I highly recommend turning at least 20% of it into silver. Here's what I do know, because we're seeing the rhetoric, we're seeing the BRICS posture themselves, we're seeing presidential candidates be assassinated, we're seeing others being impeached because they're supporting the BRICS, and this is coming from the transatlantic banks. I expect very, very soon for China to test the mettle of the corrupt Western stewards of paper gold and paper silver by lifting the gold price by something like $100. That's going to catch the short traders with their pants down, and it's going to be Katie bar the door.
Now, don't think for a moment that the Russians and the Chinese elite are not in bed with the Hindenburgs and the trial out. This is the orchestrated game that they're doing, and they always want you to think there's a good cop and a bad cop scenario.
Mm-hmm.
But they're all playing. This is more like a stage. Okay, so it's orchestrated to make it look like they're knocking down it's not them. It's the people, these same people that are doing this globally.
Well, I mean, the actions that we see, the Bilderbergs, which are really doing their best to try to control the world economy, frankly, Gil, I think they're pretty frustrated, because there's a lot of aware people that listen to programs like this one and listen to great guests like you, and they're making moves. They're taking care of themselves. They're protecting themselves. This awakeness, this awareness is springing up all over the world, and the Bilderbergs hate it. They want to shut it down, but they cannot do it. This is a non-local kind of information system.
Well, let me show you how they're moving the cattle. Okay, just like you said, the BRIC nations, where the value of a currency is linked to the assets of a country.
Sure.
Basically, the currency is title. The piece of paper as a currency has now become a title to the natural resources of a land.
Yeah, that's right.
So the only thing they have to do is keep the country in debt, where they owe more of the currency to the bankers, and the bankers end up owning all of the natural resource by fiat, because of fiat currency, because it's acting as a title. So
I see.
They're going to push it to. They think, well, look, this is no longer a fiat currency because it's backed by the natural resources. It's a trap to conquer all of the natural resources through debt, and
and that's slavery.
Yes, it's just a different system of slavery they are implementing.
Outstanding observation. Because in order for the dollar to remain strong, we can't keep pumping money into it. The fake money, the QE, is just not going to continue. So that means they have to do two things. First of all, they have to rig the major financial markets in favor of the dollar, which they're doing. That's what the Dow is all about. And the other thing they got to do is they have to keep regional wars going, because that's a flow of billions of dollars. It also ties up the money of the country in which, the sanctions are being applied. And Lord knows we're seeing those two things happen before our eyes.
Correct. You're a world traveler as well. You probably went to China and Russia.
Yeah, I haven't been to Russia. I've been to China several times, Egypt, Nepal, Tibet. I've been to Qatar. So, I've traveled quite a bit.
Well, I've been to Kazakhstan, Africa, China, and so on. And one thing I've noticed, once you get out of the capital city and go to the, like 3-4 hours away from the capital city, you're going back in time 50 to 60 years.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of these countries you go to, they don't even have reliable electricity and no clean drinking water.
Correct. So, are they really as large of a threat economically and militarily?
No, I don't think
so. As they claim to.
No, I think the armed American is the biggest threat in the world right now.
There you go. So they have to take care of that person. They have to make them wear. See, once they're rationing food, and they later on, Mr. Obama, Mr. Administration says, okay, anybody with a registered gun, for you to get your ration of food, you got to go along with our program. You can't own a gun for us to give you food. So they got to trade their weapons for and then whoever doesn't, they'll outlaw it. So.
Yeah, but what people will do is they'll just plow up their backyard and plant a garden and say, screw you. I'm not going to the government for cheese. I'm not trading a gun for cheese or a gun for oatmeal.
Right. But then eventually your bullets will go bad, like in Australia and Canada. Eventually the mechanisms will fail. Eventually they win with that scenario. They have too much power. The only one that can return us back to a non-slave situation for the world would be the Messiah coming back. Yes.
Well, I understand that. I've read that book, and I believe it as well. But I also think that book is a glimpse at the future. And if God has told me anything in my life, it is that if I show you the future, it's a conditional future. I'm giving you this information so that you can change. And if it's possible, mankind can change. It can repent. It can walk. It can stop. We can stop killing our babies. We could stop doing drugs. We could stop, the things that we're doing that tear apart the morale or the morals of this country. And we can repent and we can be blessed by God. Again, we have that ability.
Sure. The only problem that I see with this scenario, like if you were to, let's say the Americans were to rise up and take back their government, the trilateral and the Benedict do not want to lose power. They're willing to lose all of America. They will tell their allies, which are the Russians and the Chinese, wipe out America instead.
You bring up a good point. The way we take back our nation is with elections. And I think this time we have this non-establishment candidate. Sure, he's a blue-collar billionaire and he says what he thinks. But I actually think he's more answerable to the people. And quite frankly, I'm almost 61 years old. I am sick and tired of lawyers being in the White House.
Oh, man, did you say a lot right there? Because they've
But he doesn't think like a lawyer. He thinks like a businessman. And I, for one, am ready to send the CEO to Washington, D.C. and tell those boys, your game is over.
I wish Trump ends up being the person he claims to be. But I'm just
Why would he change? After 30 years of being in the public eye, why would he change?
Because the people who control purse strings, the law and the banking system, that makes him a billionaire, are controlled by these people we talked about earlier.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. Of course, a lot of the stuff he owns, he doesn't have any debt on.
Look, I already talked to a man who was the richest man in the world twice, and they brought him down twice.
Wow.
Okay. So when you're playing ball against them, they don't play fair.
No, they don't
play fair. Okay. Americans go there thinking that we're going to follow the rules. You can't play fair with these guys.
No.
It's not there. They got a rigged game against you. That's why I'm still. Look, what he says is I'm all for, and I'll probably vote for him. But I'm not going to put my hopes in the clouds expecting one guy to make all these changes. I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, because you're right. I mean, all Congress and Senate and Lord knows all the agencies are going to try and stop him from doing what he wants to do. And by the time he ever gets moving, his 4 years are going to be up, and it's going to be election time again. So
because the first thing he would have to do is call out the Army and seize all of Congress and the Federal Reserve and the IRS, and make that change, physically, if he really wants to make change happen. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. The laws are against him to even, make that happen.
Well, he could tell his secretaries, which all head up the agencies, departments, bureaus, and administrations, I want you to cut the size of your agencies by 50%. You have 90 days. Get it done.
Mm-hmm.
He's in charge. It's his secretaries. Gil, I can't tell you enough how much I thank you for coming on the program. Obviously, I need you a lot worse than you need me, but it is a great pleasure to have you on the program again. I can't believe 3 hours.
Being at least a cause of a proportion or a number of these volcanoes and earthquakes that we're seeing an exacerbation of.
That's a pretty good question. For those of you that don't know what the X-37B is, it's a miniature unmanned space shuttle. It was developed by NASA. They ran out of money because of budget cuts, and the Air Force stepped in, took over the program, moved it into what they call the rapid deployment, which was basically a blank check. They moved the operation to Area 51 and also another secret area. They finished developing the space shuttle, and they launched it. Now, this thing has been on several missions. One of them was 9 months long, and the other was 13 months long. I think they have more than one of these things. But the payload is confidential. I've tried a lot of times to find out what the heck are they flying up there for 9 months. And by this way, this thing can change orbits after it's launched. It has its own propulsion system, and it can change orbits. So it has been doing a lot of maneuvers up there, and we don't really know what it has been shooting. We do know from past experience that HARP and HARP-type weapons and multiple HARP, these are high-frequency active auroral research programs, can be tuned to one another, and the long-wave harmonics can and have been proven to release the pressure in the ground in the form of earthquakes, if the ground has a propensity for an earthquake. And the telltale sign is a kind of lavender haze that occurs 8 to up to 4 hours before the earthquake, and then it cuts loose. So we know that that's out there. We know that lots of ham operators have been picking up the signals. I did a demonstration twice on History Channel and once on True TV with Jesse Ventura. I demonstrated how HARP can be used to move water vapor around, which they can use to move weather. So it was a series called Weather Warfare, and I thought I would build a scale model and show the public live on TV how it works. So, I think it's quite possible, and I wouldn't put it past them. I know one thing: if they build a weapon system, they just can't resist pushing the button.
Exactly. One other thing that I do know, or at least I've discerned, that X is generally the classification for top secret, B, the designation for a black off-budget project, which would imply that they have other funding sources, perhaps other black holes of revenue streams, that they fund secretly these projects that they want to operate. In fact, you just mentioned the All-in-the Weather 2025 Air Force project of weather modification, which we see emanated with the so-called aerial sprayings termed solar radiation management, which is supposed to cause reflecting the sun, which I'm not sure is not to exacerbate global cooling as opposed to global warming.
Well, it probably does. It does reflect infrared radiation, which is a long-wave radiation, but it intensifies shortwave radiation or ultraviolet radiation, which can actually sterilize or severely sunburn things at the surface. Not good.
Well, we certainly know that there's changes going on. This new 10th planet is certainly not without some suggestions to plausibility, in fact, likelihood, and the cyclic nature of these extremely long elliptical patterns that occur from some of these objects that we don't see in our common lifetimes and miss several different cycles, and therefore deprive us of the ability to know about these things other than scientists without conflict hiding the facts from us.
Yeah, well, I mean, JPL knows better than to say absolutely positively we only have 9 planets in our solar system. Listen, I have one more call hanging on. I want to get to that before the end of the break. Thank you. Thank you so much for calling.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye. All right, let's bring the other caller on. We have about 3 minutes. Let's go ahead. Caller in Kansas City, you're on. Welcome to the program.
Yes, hi, Bruce. This is John in Mission, Kansas, and I've been listening to you for quite some time, and your show is incredible. And of course, I have to say, usually everything that you say or what you speak of, you're dead on.
Well, I'm humbled to the dust. I really appreciate that. That keeps me at this microphone week after week. Thank you.
Yes, and one thing I wanted to add was I lived in New York, but I also lived for about 12 years out in Northern California, and I am a survivor of the Loma Prieta earthquake.
That was a heck of a quake. I mean, that stopped the World Series.
Yes, it did. I consider myself one of the luckiest men in the world. I was a service business developer, customer service representative, and my pager went off. In those days, they didn't have cell phones like we have today.
I remember pagers.
Exactly. And the one we had, my company, it beeped, and you had to call the home office.
Sure.
And I was just getting ready to go home. I was in the East Bay. I was leaving an account, and the pager went off, and I said, great. I wanted to go home, and I was hoping to beat some of that World Series traffic. My goal was to go over the San Rafael Bridge into Marin County where I lived. And I called, and they said, oh, John, you're going to call this account in South San Francisco. I said, great. So I called. They're having a problem with some of our printing plates.
You got about a minute and a half, so trim it up.
Okay, so basically what happened was I decided to head south, went over the San Mateo Bridge, and that's when the earthquake happened. Because I made the call, right? I was looking up at that cipher structure, and I just beat it. I was very lucky.
Wow.
But when you talk about what's going to happen here, I get goosebumps, and these people don't really understand. I just saw a civilization and people out of control. It wasn't as nice as they say people behaved. It was awful.
I'll bet. And that's really, in this country anyway, because things are more well-built than they are in some other countries around the world. Mm-hmm. What really happens here is the panic, and people that take advantage of the panic and the chaos, and law enforcement isn't designed to, handle massive panic. They can do little stuff up to 2% of our population, but they can't do lots of stuff. Listen, I really, really appreciate the call. I know the music's going to start playing here in just a second. You got about 15 seconds if you want to add something.
Okay, yeah, the last thing I want to say was I think people should be prepared to listen to what you're saying, because I was on Lombard Street right in San Francisco, and I saw people getting dragged out of their cars, beaten up,
oh my gosh,
stolen, and everything.
Oh my gosh.
Truth Frequency Radio is your #1 source for news and information without the hate, hype, and fear. We are proud to bring you cutting-edge programs like The Kev Baker Show, The Freedom Link with Joe Joseph, Truth Frequency with Chris and Cherie Geo, The Christopher Everard Show, X Squared with Brooks Agnew, Down the Rabbit Hole with Popeye. Freaky Friday with the Woo Crew. Waking Up the Masses with Robert Bruce. Phoenix Rising Radio, and dozens more. Did you know you can listen from any computer, mobile device, or from any telephone by dialing 832-225-5308. Or call into your favorite show toll-free at 866-37-TRUTH. Uncensored talk and news you won't hear in the mainstream media 24 hours a day. Truth Frequency Radio. We are EFR. Your protection from deception.
Have you ever noticed that even though America spends twice as much as the rest of the world on doctors and medicine, we're still some of the sickest people on the planet? If you think the medical community has failed us and that there must be a better way, then you'll want to tune in for the Your DIY Health radio program here on Truth Frequency Radio. The host, Sergeant Jim Ram, retired, was facing a laundry list of chronic health conditions that his physician was telling him were incurable. He became a student of true medical nutrition and learned how he could reverse every one of his ailments with science-based, clinically verified medical nutrition. In just a few months, he was able to reverse high blood pressure, gastric reflux, sleep apnea, arthritis, degenerative disc disease, heart arrhythmia, and AFib, and many more. He wants to help you do the same. Tune in to Your DIY Health on Truth Frequency Radio every Thursday from 9 to 11 a.m. Eastern. That's 6 to 8 a.m. Pacific.
Visualize and implement a hologram of unconditional love above your head. This is a holographic sphere with the flower of life pattern infinitely expanding inwardly to infinity.
The all-new Sacred Geometry Shop has arrived, featuring 8 of the world's most renowned sacred geometry and visionary artists. The mission of SGS is to embed sacred geometry art, frequencies, and equations into all conventional products in order to raise the vibration and help heal one's own individual life. Products include art, canvas prints, skateboards, Galaxy and iPhone cases, clothing, hats, jewelry, home decor, yoga mats, and a new Sacred Geometry skincare line. Enter the word STARSEED for an additional 25% discount. Log on today to sacredgeometryshop.com and feel the vibration.
Radio Ranch with Robert Sales, Monday through Friday on Truth Frequency Radio.
Well, I dreamed I saw the knights in armor come, saying something about a queen. There were peasants singing and drummers drumming, and the archers split the tree. There was a fanfare blowing to the sun.
Welcome back to X-Squared Radio. I'm your host, Brooks Agnew. It is May 1st, 2016. We are live between 8 and 11. Our call-in number is 866-37-TRUTH. It is the same for all programs here on the Truth Frequency Radio Network. This hour, I have Gil Broussard coming on. He was on April 15th of 2015. And what we covered was the advent of the approach of another planet into our solar system, a 10th planet, estimated to be 7 times the size of Earth. And during that time, of course, I had a lot of questions just like you did. And what we resolved at the end of our interview was, you know what, we'll just watch for the next year and see what happens. If nothing happens, you know, maybe Gil just had some good ideas and he was a great entertainer and everything was fine. But guess what? In the last year, a lot of stuff has happened and it's accelerated. So what we're going to talk about, we're going to put all this into perspective for you. We don't want to panic you. We want to inform you. We're not going to strike fear in you. The idea is to enlighten you and make you aware to it. All right. Welcome to the program, Gil. How are you doing?
Well, thank you, Brooks. It's a pleasure being on your show.
Well, I know that, well, when you get to be our age, not all the plumbing and construction of our body seems to work right all the time. And I know you've been a little under the weather. I want to know, are you okay to go tonight?
Yes, I am. I'm feeling better. I've been having a lot of problems with my gallbladder. But today's a good day.
Excellent. Excellent. So any of you listeners out there have any ideas for fixing a gallbladder without cutting that baby out, email it to me. I'll send it on to Gil. We'll be doing good. All right. By way of update, the last time Gil was on X-Squared Radio was April 15th of 2015, and we discussed the signs that might take place by March of this year. And one of those signs was an increase in volcanic activity. And last week, actually, it was Tuesday of this week, we had the 41st volcano erupt this year. We have 65 active volcanoes in the USA, but they're not erupting yet. What do you think is the main reason why your prediction came true?
Well, as this, we could see by the past history within the last 15 to 20 years that we've had exponential growth on frequency and these eruptions of the volcanic activity, as well as earthquakes and many other factors. And it's just the approach as the magnetic pull, which is not exactly gravity, it's going to be a magnetic pull, is what's affecting the Earth, and it's also affecting the sun, and it's also what's affecting our orbits of our asteroids.
That's interesting.
That's the reason why we've had more.
Help me understand the difference between a magnetic effect and a gravitational effect.
Well, the gravitational effect is really, you can take what's called the Roche limit, which is for Earth is 1.5 times its radius of the diameter of Earth. And that's where you have geosynchronous orbit, where the gravity does not pull back satellites. That is actually very close to the boundaries of what gravity is. Anything beyond that is going to be a magnetic field attraction. And it goes, I think it's something like a magnitude of 20 times greater, like 20 zeros, put it behind a number. And that's how far the magnetism goes out into space and interrelate with each planet and the orbits around the sun and everything.
That's what I think too, because you look at things like our solar system and say the bright star that we call Sirius, which is not really the heavy mass Sirius. There's another one behind it that's a heavy mass Sirius, but Earth has been aligned to that star for at least 11,000 years, according to the Egyptians and the alignment of the pyramids. In order for that to be, in order for Sirius not to progress through the precessions the way the other star formations do, we have to be orbiting around that thing. It's a binary complex between our sun and that star. But in order for that to be, you've got to be right. It's got to be magnetically coupled to that star.
Right. It's been proven out recently. The physicists, there's two camps of thought. The astronomers say that the universe is ruled by gravity, and that there's missing matter. 96% of all matter is missing, and that's where they created dark energy and dark matter.
That's kind of convenient, isn't it?
Yeah, you have to create that to where you could, postulate where it went to. But the physicists had a much more simpler answer, which is if you go by the rule of Occam's razor, the simpler answer is usually the best one. Well, they said that there's no missing matter, that the vacuum of space is not a true vacuum, that it's like a lake of plasma, and that the universe is ruled by electromagnetic forces, is a stronger ruling force, and that minor force is gravity. And that was proven out just recently in an actual physical example that nature provided. Remember, actual true science is having a real example of something, that tells that a theory is wrong, and that it's, or not a theory is fact. Well,
I'm always amazed at how people jump from hypothesis to theory without doing the experimentation. So what we're basically saying is in the last 10 to 15 years, the number of earthquakes and the number of volcanoes has increased in frequency, and the intensity of those earthquakes and the veracity of those volcanoes have also increased. So it indicates that something is really shaking up the crust of Earth.
Yes, whenever we do an overlay with the Chinese model, and it was pointing to where they sent the Voyager and Pioneer probes, and when we did a rough estimate, we estimated when NASA went silent in December 92, that the Pioneer and Voyager probes had given them triangulation, that they knew now that this planet was coming towards the sun, not orbiting the sun like a normal planet. And so that's what we did with the overlay. That meant the closest possible year for its return of in 16 March, and then but it looks like it will be it could be a couple years from that, but that'd been the closest time. And whenever we overlay those earthquakes and the volcanic activity, because that's 24 years for it to approach the sun, it takes. That's exactly what we would expect, and that's exactly what.
Anything that modern Mexico has ever experienced before, and considering what has been happening in Ecuador, Japan, Yellowstone, and now Kentucky as of today, over the past year even, I believe that there is great reason for concern. That's why at 8:30 Eastern Time, 5:30 Pacific Time, in 25 minutes, we are going to have the great Gil Broussard back on our program. We're going to do a follow-up. Now, you've probably heard Gil on one or maybe even a dozen radio interviews in the last year, but he hasn't been on those programs twice. He almost kicked off his campaign here at X-Word Radio 1 year ago, and now he's back. And we're going to go over some of the information that we talked about last year and see if there's been any changes. I also have it's a really bad recording from NASA, but let me give you the gist of it. That's not the case. The reason is NASA concludes that there is a 10th planet that is probably, and I'm quoting what they said, up to 7 times the mass of Earth, and they calculate it has an orbit period of around 20,000 years. If that's the case, and this planet is getting, on its approach to our sun, and it's going to pass right over Earth's orbit, then it's going to pass over Earth's orbit twice, and it's going to be dragging a lot of garbage with it. It's going to pass over once when it comes in and once when it goes out, and Mr. Gil Broussard has interesting theories about what's going to happen. And you know what they say about being prepared and not needing it? Well, you definitely want to call up your friends right now and tell them to tune in to X-Squared Radio, because it's better to be prepared and not need it. Now, the explosion of Mount Popocatépetl was accompanied by the emission of incandescent fragments, which were reported to be landing up to 1.6 kilometers away northeast of the volcano, which is commonly known as El Popo. But words cannot really describe just how spectacular this eruption was. If you're interested, you can view the video footage of the moment when the volcano erupted. I have the link in my notes, which are free for you to access if you go to truthfrequencyradio.com/x2-radio. You can not only listen to this archive free for 1 week, so if you hear it live tonight, make sure to call your friends. Tell them when they get to work tomorrow, you go to this website and you listen to this broadcast, because it's important. It's very, very important, especially if they live east of Wyoming. Seismologists all over the globe are speculating about which area of our planet may be hit next. For example, scientists in India believe that the tremendous amount of tectonic strain that has built up out there could ultimately produce a magnitude 8 or a magnitude 9 earthquake. And they are convinced that this quake could come at any time. Now, I don't know if you know the way the Richter scale works. It's also the same scale as the metric tensor, which gives us a little bit more information about whether the quake is up and down or whether the quake is side to side and what the depth of that quake is. But each number higher is a factor of 10. Okay, it's a logarithmic scale. So a 9 is 10 times more powerful than an 8. A 6.5 is where things fall down and cars get rearranged and pools spill out and gas mains break. A 7 is where streets begin to crack open, parking lots begin to tilt on their edge, apartment complexes and parking garages collapse. An 8, it's completely devastating. The only thing that can survive an 8 are very tall buildings. They can sit there and wobble back and forth, but chances of them losing a lot of glass are very good. And I don't know if you've seen the videos from Japan of people in their apartments at the 25th floor, the 30th floor, the 40th floor, filming out of their windows as their building sways back and forth 8 to 10 feet, back and forth, back and forth. I think you'd be heading for the stairs, as would I. The northward push has been creating a huge amount of tectonic strain in this Indian region, making it particularly prone to earthquakes. Scientists believe there's so much energy stored in that area that an earthquake of magnitude greater than 8, possibly 9, would be needed to release it. Now, here in the United States, some experts are deeply concerned that the West Coast is particularly vulnerable. It always is. In every 24-hour period, there's something like 2,000 quakes of 1.0 or greater. But we haven't really had, the really strong quakes out there. Where most people are looking right now is called the New Madrid Fault. And this goes along a little town called La Center, which is on the Mississippi River. If you remember in 1812, you might not remember, but we have that information right here. In 1812, there was an earthquake so strong in that area that it made the Mississippi River run backwards, and it formed Reelfoot Lake. Now, I don't need to tell you, even if you don't live in that area, that if a quake like that hit today, it would cut the commerce of the United States in half. And it would cut it in half, not for a week, not even for a month. It would probably cut it in half for 3 to 5 years. That's how long it would take to restore the interstate bridges going over the Mississippi River. It would be completely devastating to the economy of our country. So I'm going to give you some guidelines of what to do here in just a minute, because it's very important. I've been through these. I know what it's like to be immobilized for 3 days by the National Guard and not be able to migrate. And I'm going to give you personal experience that will help you. During a recent interview with Bobby Powell, Mr. Birkeland, who taught at Appalachian State University, right here, not far from where I am, up in Boone, North Carolina, and then returned to California, he explained that most mega quakes take place either during a new moon or a full moon, and we are coming up to a new moon. We just got done with a full moon, and we had a couple of quakes. And he pointed to the San Andreas Fault and the Cascadia subduction zone as areas that he is particularly concerned about at the moment. Well, that's because he works out there. But out here, where 70% of the population of the country lives, we're concerned about the New Madrid. We're concerned about the fault that goes up the East Coast, right up to New York. And Gil's going to talk a little bit about that tonight. So people are asking, is this big one imminent? Now, Jim Birkeland, the man who predicted the Loma Prieta World Series earthquake, has a terrifying warning for the west coast of the U.S. in wake of massive earthquakes in Ecuador and Japan that have left hundreds dead, awakened volcanoes around the Pacific Ocean's ring of fire, and kicked off earthquake swarms in Hawaii, Arizona, and Yellowstone National Park. And by the way, Old Faithful, not so faithful. It's been spewing almost continuously. People that run the park are getting very nervous, and they're very close to saying, you know what, I think we're going to just cut off tourism for now and watch things very closely. So Mr. Birkeland says beware of the new and full moons, which gives us about 2 weeks to the new moon, okay? Just a little over 2 weeks. So, by the way, something unique about this earthquake at La Center in Kentucky, it was felt in parts of Illinois and Missouri not long ago, just a few hours ago. It's this Sunday, May 1st, 2016. According to the National Weather Service in Paducah, which is right at the border of Missouri and Kentucky, and the USGS, a magnitude 3.5 was recorded about 8.7 miles north of La Center and 24 miles west of Paducah, almost right on the river. It happened around 1:12 a.m. this morning, and here's the unique thing about it. It only had a depth of 8.3 miles. Normally, quakes are between 75 and 150 miles deep. When they occur, there's a lot of mass that can absorb the energy of that quake before it reaches the surface. So a quake of 3.5 feels like a quake of about 4.5 when it's this close to the surface. It also depends on whether the quake was going up and down or whether it was going side to side. The other thing that makes this area quite unique is it's not built like the West Coast. It's not built like the East Coast. This area is one giant limestone lake bed from the northern part of Mississippi all the way to the southern border of North Dakota. And that means if there's a quake in this area, it is felt a long ways away. This one was felt at 3.5. This one was felt 267 miles away from the epicenter. So the question everyone's asking right now is, could we be witnessing a similar pattern today? For those of you that just tuned in, our call-in number is 866-37-TRUTH, 866-37-TRUTH. And in roughly 15 minutes, we have Gil Broussard coming back on the program. He was on the program April 15, 2015. We talked about the approach of Planet X. He gave us his scriptural, spiritual, and scientific reasons why he thought that Planet X would be approaching Earth about this time. And he also said, we'll watch over the next 12 months. We'll see what happens. If we start seeing the results of, or the effects of, gravitational perturbation of the crust of Earth, then it will be reason for concern. Planet X is on its way. We have added to that a discovery or a realization by NASA through their calculations that there would in fact be a planet that sits opposite, has to be massive enough, about 7 times the mass of the Earth, opposite of the orbit, the elliptical orbit of the other 9 planets, in order to keep the sun balanced right where it is, which it's very, very stable, doesn't wibble or wobble a whole lot. The Earth wobbles a little bit. The sun wobbles a little bit, but not a whole lot. Not like it's being pulled around by 9 planets on one side of it, like it would be. The other thing to consider here is that, planets don't put off a lot of light, especially if they're dark in color. And it's approaching our Earth from, let's say, with the sun at its back or the sun at an oblique angle. We're not going to see it very well. The other thing to consider is that all of the professional government telescopes are all spoken for. The next 36 months of their time is paid for, contracted, and booked by universities and official programs. So here's the thing. There are about 10,000 amateur astronomers out there with telescopes powerful enough to see this planet. But you have to realize it's a tremendous amount of space to be looking at, and a telescope can only look at about 2 or 3 degrees at best of space, especially if you're looking that deep, even with a digital camera. So the problem is we don't have enough people looking in the right direction for the right planet. And this is really the issue. Now, I have a couple minutes. I can take a couple of phone calls if they're on subject. Let's go ahead and bring the one in Las Vegas on right now. Welcome to the program, sir. How are you?
Well, good evening, Bruce.
It's Brooks, but we're fine. How are you?
My apologies, Brooks. I'm a little under the weather, and I didn't mean to misstate your name. No insult intended.
That's all right. What's on your mind?
Well, a couple of different things. Notwithstanding that we're in perihelion of our elliptical orbit, the closest pathway to the sun in 25,000-year cycle, approximately, I'm wondering if you have considered the possibility of the XB projects, XB 47, 51, 52, and who knows how many different iterations of these cold wave lasers flown by drones, being able to precipitate volcanic or earthquake-type seismic activities